The would-be assassin captured on Sunday after he fled Trump's golf course had a not insignificant public profile because of all of his flacking for Ukraine and for people to join him in the fight in Ukraine to repel the Russians. I mean, his example of the interviews he was giving, profiles he was receiving, including in the New York Times.
You know, when you talk to a 20-year-old guy that sold everything he owns to come here and fight, that is heroism. You know, he's coming here to risk his life for humanity, for the Ukrainians. You know, guys that sell everything they own to come here and support the Ukrainians while others sit at home and do nothing. You know, it's totally mind-blowing how we have this divide of people that are selfless and courageous and wonderful and willing to sell everything they own to come here and support, keep people from getting killed, to shelter kids and protect Ukrainians, and others that just, want to sit at home and not. It's just, it's an indictment of our entire human society to say, hey, where do we stand? Do we stand for good? Or do we just not care? I mean, does the world not care? That's the feeling that I wrestle with every day in my interactions with everybody. Every one of us is responsible for the outcome of this war. Every one of us.
Speaking of his interactions with others, many who had interactions with him noticed that there was something wrong with him. Chelsea Walsh, a nurse who had several encounters with this guy in Kyiv in 2022, said his threats of violence worried her so much she conveyed her concerns to a Customs and Border Protection officer in an hour-long interview at Washington's Dulles Airport 2 years ago, June of 22, a little bit more than 2 years ago.
Red flag.
There's others. He was well known among volunteer aid groups in Ukraine as a, quote, fraudster and, quote, kind of a whack job. That's according to Sarah Adams, a former CIA officer who helped run a network that linked 50 aid groups to share information and coordinate humanitarian and volunteer efforts.
Well, he did have felony charges for stolen goods from 1997 all the way to 2010.
Not to mention felony charges for possession of a fully automatic weapon, a machine gun. And this is why one of the charges against him is felon in possession of a gun, with potentially more charges coming. For more on this, please be joined by Tanya Lukanova. She's a documentary filmmaker and a reporter and video journalist for the Free Press. We mentioned her yesterday because she had an interaction with this guy as well. And she's written a piece following up on yesterday's blurb. Why do journalists like me take this guy, I don't like to say his name very much, but Ryan Routh, seriously? Tanya Lukanova, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Emmy. Thank you so much for having me on.
So, give us what your interactions were with this guy when you had them.
Right. I was working on a story about U.S.-trained elite Afghan commandos who are eager to join Ukraine war. I was at a publication called Semaphore last year.
Mm-hmm.
In the course of reporting that story, a source inside Ukraine's Foreign Legion has recommended that I reach out to this guy, Ryan Routh. He came recommended as, a little off, a little bit too eager, a little bit crazy. The Ukrainians definitely thought of him as weird, but at least with this particular source, they kind of, told him that he's one of the more able foreign volunteers as well. He was helping on many different fronts. He clearly cared passionately about Ukraine's plight. He spent 5 months in Kiev. And so, by the time that I came to interview him, I recorded a 20-minute video interview, out of which we ended up using maybe 2 or 3, where he talks about his efforts to bring Afghan nationals to Ukrainian front lines. And, during that interaction, he definitely seemed off to me. But at the same time, as somebody who's been working on the stories about foreign legions, he wasn't even the most colorful personality that I've come to interview. This type of line of work attracts a certain people with certain disposition, I would say.
Yeah, sure.
So
Like Sean
he
Penn.
did not strike me as too weird, or I definitely would not have assumed that this is a future would-be assassin of a former president.
Did he make any disparaging remarks about President Trump?
He
during your
did not,
tour?
and that's another thing. I mean, it was such a narrow inquiry. Looking back at it, we were talking about this very narrow slice of what he was doing, what I was interested in within the confines of the story that I was working on. And looking back at it, that's, it was fascinating and bemusing to me to learn yesterday that he is the man who tried to assassinate former President Trump, because like looking back, and as you were just saying before, there were so many red flags. How come so many of us, including the New York Times and Newsweek and policymakers with whom he met and people inside Ukraine's defense ministry with whom he allegedly had contact, how did we overlook all of them? And, the conclusion that I come to in the Free Press article is that he was fighting for the good cause. He was the right kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, the
we
right
were
kind of
willing
crazy. Yeah.
the right kind of crazy. He was on the side of Ukraine, and I'm Russian myself. I'm born and raised in Moscow, so perhaps there's also a little bit of a oversensitivity with me to overcorrect on the side,
Hmm.
reporting on the war for emotional reasons.
Yeah,
So
well, I mean, it's interesting too. I mean, not that this is necessarily required by any stretch in terms of interviewing a subject for a specific topic where you're going to, pour through his social media postings
right,
or take judicial notice that apparently he had a self-published book that
right,
included references to assassinating Trump. Um,
right.
but I mean, it is just but even if you had reviewed that stuff, you say, well, I mean, this is um, maybe
Exactly.
somebody who has Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, he doesn't say anything different than you hear at some rich suburban honky's house in suburban Chicago. So I mean, it's like,
Absolutely.
how do you really drill down and say this guy is willing to go next level?
Right. No, that's absolutely true, Dan. And also, this story, we were working on it. It was a scoop, so we were working on a print and video pieces to publish within a single day. So it was all hands on deck. And not only did I not have any time to sort of go back and do the background check on this guy, but as you said, even if I did find some of those red flags, I don't think it would necessarily detract me from still, publishing it, because, again, like, you just give a pass to these types of folks who are willing to go halfway around the world to join foreign wars. You got to assume that there must be something off about them.
Yeah, well, I mean, that there's a certain sort of zealotry, and then of course we've seen this go a lot of different directions. I mean, think about the Americans who went over and fought with Islamic extremists,
Oh
Islamic
yeah.
terrorist
That's
groups
right.
during the height of the war on terror, and so there's just all these a lot of these people, and this is just attended to a free society, who are sort of lost, who are marginally connected to reality, who get hyper politicized, who need a cause to provide
Right.
definition to their life. And I mean, that's why it was just like that. The clip of the interview he played, he's so emotional about
Yes.
not even his own decision, but like these other people that are coming, and why isn't everybody coming? It's just sort of
Yes.
sophomoric almost.
Yes. The question is, where does the thin line between passion and craziness, just the madness, where is that line, right? And how do you find it?
Yeah.
And
Now,
that's absolutely right.
since you sat down and interviewed him for 20 minutes, has the FBI contacted you? Because yesterday, the head of the FBI Miami field office said that they'd be speaking or just trying to figure out his involvement in trying to recruit Afghan soldiers to fight in Ukraine.
Remarkably, not yet. I've got so many requests from various media companies to give interviews, but one call that I have not received yet is from the FBI, although multiple people told me that I should expect it.
But you
Hmm.
have still the raw tape, right?
Yes, and we managed to recover. We were using software called Riverside to do audio and video interview with him at the time, so they were incredibly helpful to help us restore the whole 20-minute piece.
Do you know if he ever fought on the front lines or he fought at all in the Ukrainian war? Or was he just a recruiter?
From what I know from my Ukrainian sources, he did not fight. Either he attempted to fight and then was expelled, or didn't even set foot on the battlefield. But he was, he definitely had no prior military experience when he went to Ukraine at the beginning of the Russian invasion. And from what I understand, he was more like acting as a liaison between international fighters who want to join Ukraine's war effort and the Ukrainian military units and aid groups.
I mean, just as a journalist, what's your perspective on the coverage over the last 48 hours of this failed assassination attempt?
Well, I honestly, and that's something that I also put in the story, I'm a little bit taken back by the lack of outrage or just the shock, the lack of shock that this generates, the very idea that there is now 2 assassinations in as many months on the former president. I would assume that it should have brought some more outrageous public discourse, which it hasn't. And that obviously raises other questions in terms of, going back to being the right kind of crazy. Are we willing to tolerate madness for the sake of supporting the right cause? Something that I'm a little bit frustrated about, if I'm being completely honest. So that's...
Yeah, that's a great question. That is a great question. I wish some news readers on these cable news networks had that question put to them. Tanya Lukanova is a documentary filmmaker and reporter, video journalist for the Free Press. Do check out her piece, I Met Trump's Would-Be Assassin. Tanya Lukanova, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thank you. And she joined us on our Turnkey.Pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan